right. Council, we're going to get started since we're a couple minutes late. All right, the time is 3:03 p.m. and I'm calling to order a called meeting of the City Council of the City of Sunset Valley, Texas for Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. And Council, the way we're going to proceed with this is that we're going to go to public communication. There'll also be an opportunity for members of the public to speak to agenda items, particularly agenda item number 3, which is the only one we have, I guess, in terms of, I'm sorry, agenda item number 5, which is the only one we have. But we're going to have prior to that, we're going to go into executive session for discussion with the city attorney, and then reconvene into open session, and then have our budget workshop, and then if needed, we can have a second executive session at the end of it. Because we are constrained by the Board of Adjustments, which is also meeting tonight, they have to meet at 6 o'clock, and there's some setup that needs to happen. We can't go any later than 5:30, so if there's a need to continue our workshop or discussion, that would be something for council to consider as a follow-on action today, in terms of the next steps. But with that, I'll open up to citizen public communication. I think the one comment in open meeting or open town hall is related to budget item number 5. So unless Melissa, you want to speak now, or you can speak at the number 5, okay. So with that, if we can have a motion to move into executive session. Councilor Reitz?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second from Councilmember Rosengard?
Second.
Okay, sorry. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. All right, we're going to convene to executive session at 3:05 p.m. All right, council. We are reconvening into open session at 4:37 p.m. And remember that we're going to be stopping no later than 5:30 in order to prepare for the Board of Adjustments. We don't need to take any action for the executive session, so we're going to go right into our next item, which is the budget workshop. So I think one thing that would probably be useful for us as the sponsors for Councilmember Rosengart and Councilmember Reitz have put together some material, which we might start with a presentation so we can begin with some analysis and then proceed in iterations or with follow-on steps. But Councilmember Reitz, if you want to begin, then we'll obviously continue from there.
Yes. Sylvia, if you could pull up that document, and Rudy, just jump in if I am missing something or misstating something. So we went in, Councilmember Rosengarten and I went in and kind of did a deep dive of the financial policies that were violated. That was, we passed the budget amendment with the stipulation or with the statement that financial policies were violated. So it's like, okay, so we've got some violations. Let's figure out what they were, and let's figure out how they happen and what we can put in place so they don't happen again. So what we did is the first step was just analyzing it. What were they? And so we kind of coded them. If you see the green there, it shows council action. Can we get rid of all those little things? Yeah, I think they will. Okay. Okay, so if you see all the green items, those were all council actions. Now, at the time, we were not doing budget amendments when we did a council action. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. We said, yes, let's go do it, but we didn't amend the budget at the same time. So now we are doing budget amendments. So we might want to put on the chart up there that we say budget amendment done with council action. And that's currently what we've been doing. I don't think we're perfect at it yet, but that is what we've been doing, okay? So if we scroll down a little further, not that far. Just tiny bit further where we're still in the admin budget. So we're looking at the admin budget here, just a little further down, past the green. Perfect, right there. Okay, so those in that orange color were actually the violations. Now, this is how we define the violations. According to our policy, a department head can go up to $500 if they have room and move it from one line item to another, up to $500. The department head, with approval of the mayor, can go up to $2,500 before the funds are expended. Now, we interpreted that because the mayor and the chief signed the checks, that they had the opportunity to see it, and they signed the checks. And so the signature on the check was kind of like the approval. And so that's a fine line there, but we had to do that somehow. And we can argue about that. It doesn't matter because they're pointed as violations. So, for example, now the bank management fees, we put that as a violation only, and it was below $2,500, but those were debited from our account, so the mayor never saw that. The mayor could never approve that. So that was a clear technical violation. It should have only gone up to $500. Dues and subscriptions, that was $2,800. If we can argue whether it was $500 or whether it was $2,500, but that was at least $362 over, okay? So those were the admins. The other thing we did is we separated out the engineering and the IT on separate spreadsheets because those require a lot more discussion. Okay, is everybody in sync of where we're at? Everybody good? Okay. So in the admin, you'll see that they basically were over $4,800 in the violations, okay? So now if we move down to the police department had a number of violations. Most of them were because of high turnover, and there was a vehicle repair. And so those limits were $56,000 over, which was a big chunk of change, okay? But they were all dealing with turnover, Okay? Let's go down a little further. Now we go to municipal court. No violations there. We go down to public works. We have two violations. One was increased cost for temporary help, and one was AC repair and replace. So those were both violations, so that was $10,000 over. Let's continue down. We had the business, okay, that was council action, never mind. Y'all can see that. And then we go down to, what department? Water department. Here we had increased costs due to the freeze, and so those were all violations. And then also our water program where we give rebates. Wow, that was pretty good. All right, so let's go down. We're saving water. And then there's one more dealing with the freeze. And that was in our wastewater. And yeah, in the wastewater, there's one with the freeze. And I think that's, yeah, one more with solid waste, again, freeze repairs. So in general, the big violations there were dealing with the freeze and the high turnover rates. There were some smaller ones, like bank management fees, things like that. We can argue those all day long because bank management fees really supports all the departments, blah, 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 blah. So you can argue that all day long, but those were the real violations. Now, was there any fraud? Was there bad decision-making in there? I don't think so. That's my opinion. I'd like to hear y'all's opinion. I really think that it was just this is the way we've always done things. We've always moved from one line to another, and no one's said anything about it before, is kind of my take on it. Would y'all agree with that? Are y'all comfortable with that?
Well, I guess one of the questions is, I think this is looking at budget amendment number 2, is that correct?
Yes, that's the only thing we looked at.
So if we looked at it holistically and went back to,
We didn't do that.
there might be some other areas where we need to look at.
There would be,
Yeah,
probably.
because it would exceed the 2,500 threshold that we set. So that'd be
I'm
one.
sure there would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just a point of clarification that, when we're talking about this, it's specific to the budget amendment number 2. Holistically, we're looking at everything last year.
That's a good point. I wish we'd have done that, but at the time, we just focused on that one.
Yeah,
so.
and I think the other thing, just as a note, I think some formalism, relying on sort of like the check process is hard because there is no sort of history that in the moment when Chief and I are signing checks that we're really presented with a historical saying, okay, what is the aggregate amount that we've collected to date on some account?
Exactly.
And
I was going to ask about that.
Right.
Yes.
So I think some way to facilitate that, to say, okay, this is flagging. This is something we have. And it hopefully happens before the check, right? Because that's always clear. The first step is let's make sure that if it needs to happen, it happens before we owe somebody money. If we can't do that, then I think some way that we can better highlight when there is a budget adjustment that's going to be required, so that it's clear when the authorities need to happen, and then. When checks are presented, there's no historical context saying this is
where we are in the budget. That's exactly.
Yeah, and so it's hard
You
because
need a report?
we pay a lot of checks, right?
I know. And I was going to ask about that because that's really from an internal control part. You are a serious part of the internal controls.
Right.
And but I remember a former mayor saying, "I just signed the checks," And,
I try not to, but at the same time, it's hard not to look at this and say, well, this is routine. It needs to get signed.
Yeah.
But when it comes to certain payments, you want to know more, and I think that's when we need to have a process in place for helping with that.
So let's put that as a problem area maybe, as one of the things is, so there's, at the check signing, there's probably some sort of report that you need or something, a flag that you need or something.
I think that would be helpful, and if there's some way that we can tie it to the budget lines, right? That's the thing that would be needed.
So we have We have another, in the budget, there were some flow charts that were presented, and I want to show you the example PO that now has, for example, the Canales contract. 3 checks needed to be paid. It's assigned a GL. Here's the total amount that was assigned to that. Here's what's left after you sign those checks. And so that's,
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think when I have questions about a PO, and and this is new, but what's happening now is that we're getting the PO signed, right, which is something we need to happen. And on there's a budget line that I can go and look up the budget and verify, right? And even if I need to ask, what is our current spend amount? And in some cases, I think there was like one recent PO where I had a question about, is this the right line? And that was a quick correction, right? The PO gets resent and it's reassigned to the new line, so those things hopefully that would prevent some things from getting mislabeled as a line that where it shouldn't be, if I'm an additional I, right, or whatever.
Right.
So that's a helpful process.
Yeah,
this is an example of just exactly that. So the PO process, as I stated to you guys before, has not been a process used in MIP. We did research, we found a PO dated 2009. That was the last time this process was used. So for this particular line item, this is Canales. So, sorry. This is Canales and Company. This is, the total amount of the PO is listed on the budget, and then how much is remaining. Here's the total PO. Here's how much is remaining after those checks are signed. And then, because this is out of a bigger line item, there's going to be some bigger numbers here, but we didn't want to confuse anybody with, there's $158,000 in that line item. Why are you saying it's 80% expended, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this contract is only one portion out of that line item. So this will be the other internal control to the check signer about how much is actually left in that account before the check gets signed and goes out.
so both the chief who signs, he could look at it, check that. Mark, the mayor, could also look at it and say, check that.
Well, I think
So-
for the POs, specifically and correct me if I'm wrong, Celia, but each PO needs to be signed by the appropriate authorizing person.
Yes,
right?
the department head.
And that's based on the
their
limits
guests.
that we have for expenditure. So
Yeah.
this is another kind of question we have about financial policies, that we have budget expenditures, which when we exceed those, we have, checks that we need to put in place. Then we have signing authority for POs.
Yes.
And I think like in that PO process, I'm not looking at the PO, I'm not signing the PO if it falls below a certain threshold, right? I think that's.
Correct.
Right, so if it's below $5,000, that's the ability of the city administrator to sign in our policies. Between $5,000
the
and
PO.
$24,999.
At the PO level.
Now, so what I'm seeing, what we've recently adopted is that these POs are, we need to make sure that these are being signed by the appropriate level. But then I think there's an added step to say, how does that information get presented to the check authorizer,
Yes.
which is a separate
Yes.
process, because the check authorization is really just more of a double, we have 2 authorized signers. It's separate from the POs in a way, right? There's a
Yes,
PO authorization to say, yes, we approve this, and then there's a follow-on to actually sign the check to actually send the money out, right?
It's a dual process. The first one is the initial tranche of money, the initial issuance of that PO, which could be $5,000 under my signature or above. That requires your signature and the other purchasing rules that need to follow, the bids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the initial overall umbrella. Then as the money is spent, and I keep using supplies as the example, our supply budget is, let's say, $15,000. So we issue it in 4 tranches, $37.50 each tranche. So as Melissa's charging, she has a credit card that she uses, or we have an account that we use. She has to go back. Lori, our accounts payable person, and Susanna are now providing a budget report biweekly that they put on the shared drive for the directors. The directors are responsible to go out and look at that budget report and make sure that what they're charging to has a dollar amount, and that they have to cite that budget report on the PO itself, and that's this highlighted yellow. What budget report did you take that out of that you believed there was money for you to charge that to? And so that's the initial first safeguard. The second safeguard comes at the check at if you see that it's February and we've already expended 80% of that money, there should be some kind of discussion from me or the director that says, this is why it's an anomaly, it's a one-time charge, the fire department, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right, because a lot of these POs I would not normally see, right? Anything, but, or,
Okay,
or
yeah.
because they would fall under the department only signing authority or department head only signing authority under Sylvia's city administrator signing authority. It is only when they exceed a certain amount do they come to the mayor, and I happen to be one of the check signers. That's always signing the checks. Chief is not on all the POs either because it wouldn't fall under his department authority for public works POs, for example.
So I think the wording in the financial policy FP 105, I think it's E maybe, it talks about the $2,500 limit. It goes directly from department head to mayor. It doesn't
Well,
even
that's it.
include
So that's
the
like
city administrator
that's
in
the
there.
upfront part of the process,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
this going to exceed my budget by more than this amount?
Yes, that's true.
And so that's even before the PO
Yes,
gets generated in some way, in some cases, but it should also be one of these department head checks to say, if they're signing a PO, they should be double checking their budget to say, am I above my threshold by more than $500, right?
yes.
So that's kind of where those
That
two
first one
policies
is,
align.
yes.
The fact that I have an ability to sign POs up to $25,000, there has to be a budget for that, right? Otherwise,
Yes.
it has to come to council,
Yes,
right? So
Yes.
if it's above $2,500,
yep,
even though I can sign it up to $25,000 or $24,999,
okay,
right? So
okay, yeah.
that being said, I think it's helpful to understand, like, what's helpful for me to have is, and I think for council too, because this is really on the back end of the process, is we need to have the upfront safeguards to ensure that when we get to a point where the budget is exceeded, it gets through the appropriate channels for approval, right? And that could be mayor approval, city administrator approval at certain thresholds. And we talked about this, about relooking at those thresholds too, in terms of like updating them, right, in terms of those thresholds to a certain extent. But that's an upfront process that should halt any activity until it gets approval.
That's
right?
correct.
And then when it comes to the actual signing of the check, that's at the very far end of the process. And it
Right.
should be a double check at that point to make sure that, that if there were any things that didn't get followed along the way, before I put my signature on it, I want to see the data to say, are we okay signing this?
Yeah, it puts enormous pressure on you if there's not all those safeguards in there,
Yeah.
so yes.
But I think there's
Yeah.
a distinction between the two upfront, the
Yes.
upfront process, the budget check, which is a much stricter limit in the financial policies. It's only up to $2,500, and that's only if you get the mayor's approval.
Right,
It's only $500 if you don't have the mayor's approval.
that's correct.
That's really where we need the kind of we need to have a way of managing that, and the department heads specifically needs a way of managing that, which is part of what we need to
Which
make sure
is, and a lot of that, I don't know if you captured, a lot of that was what Sylvia was saying, how that report is updated monthly. Department heads now have to check their budget before they go off and do something.
Or every 2 weeks now,
Those types
yeah.
of things, yes.
bi-weekly.
Yes, yes. So, I think the other thing is, yes, okay, finish your thought. I had another thought too, so.
No,
just a little bit
I'm finished with
different,
that. I'll let Alfonso had his hand raised, so
Yeah.
go ahead, Councilmember Carmona.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that at this moment, I have a PowerPoint and also I have something. When you mentioned about the purchase authorization requirements, this is the current, and it's a simple base.
Councilmember, do you want to hand this to me or to the
No,
city secretary?
I would like, if you can see that gave it to you some idea what you were talking. So with that idea, they refer, this is in the way that is in our financial policies. But I try to have one table, and I have that here, and I have a flash with other kind of things, that perhaps because this is a workshop, maybe later I can present that.
Yes.
But at this moment, that is critical, because in that gave it to you the levels of authority, and that came since POs. If you see, they have to have a PO. Only at the beginning, they don't need a PO to purchase. But after that, different levels and the authority and the bids and what type of bids. So that will tell you that. It's a little problematic when you came with the, I think 5,000 to 25,000, where I think we have to be more specific in our financial policies. And there, that gave it to you a better idea. So that included in the flow chart that you have there with positions, head works, city administrator, consul, and with that money, this is the threshold that you can be using. So I think the start is very good with that flow chart, but with that money, that gave it to you the control that you can have of the budget. So with the numbers, or I don't know what do you think, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, and I think having this, if we can present this at, if you can provide the flash drive so that
Yes.
we can bring this up at a point in the discussion. This would be helpful for, and we might even just get a copy of this,
Yeah,
for
sure.
distribution.
That was the intention.
Okay.
I read as a workshop, but at this moment, our member
That's good.
reads, and Rosengarten, they were working a lot, and it's nice that they present. I don't want to go with that.
Yeah.
And later we can go a fusion of good things, so I
Yeah.
read you.
That looks like that's kind of a summary of FP 207.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a table
Okay,
version
that's
of that,
great.
yeah.
That's great. That's
Councilmember
kind of nice
Litchfield,
because it's hard to read all the policies.
Might be a switch on the side. There's like a power switch also.
The light is just weird. Okay, so thank
Got
you
you.
for, and I'll just stand here even though it's weird. Thanks for putting together this kind of abbreviated list of the policy violations. That's nice. And it's probably good to discuss the more, I don't know the word, but there's a different word for the other types of them that probably deserve more research. But so as we're discussing this, so it jumps out to me that I see in the policy section, and again, I would like to focus on the accuracy of the numbers, whether or not our policies were followed, and then the communications stuff going back and
Okay.
forth. The communications might be beyond the scope. It might be something we can solve out of band. It might not be directly a budget thing. It might be more just committees. So the policy problems, so the root causes of that, it sounds like there was the mayor would sometimes get checks without having enough backup information. Does that sound like that we can say that was a root cause of violations? And that's been
Historical,
and we've done some countermeasures. So what I want to look for, in the spirit of this, it's like a blameless sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
just what were the root causes of these violations, and then what are the countermeasures that we've implemented? And so then another one, it sounds like we've had this, there were no POs in MIP or whatever, so we just never had any idea as we issued a PO where the budget was.
So we never issued POs within the system. POs were paper tracking.
Okay.
And they never married.
Okay.
So there is there's
So
another
no
layer.
tracking of PO. in
Yes, so
MIP.
it's PO/encumbrance. So
Okay.
for example, in the hot fund has, revenues of, let's say $170,000. And the council decides, as they did with ampersand, we're going to commit 150 of that 170. We should encumber 150, so we can't touch 150. That's not been practice in our MIP system. We should be able to freeze, encumber, and not be able to move that money. So Lori's trained in the PO process. We're still trying to figure out how to encumber in MIP.
Okay, so that's one of the challenges we have yet, just learn how to encumber.
Could I ask before you put a better structure on this, I just wrote council motion passes and then budget amendment. Did we say that we were already doing that? So it's when we need more money for something, that was the first thing. I wrote it right up there. So when we need more money for something, go ahead.
Yeah, when we pass a new project or whatever, we should with that, with passing that, we should have a budget amendment with it.
Okay, so
But,
that,
and we're
we've
doing it
had-
now, not perfectly yet, but we're doing it now.
We've had 5 already this year. So like
Yeah.
in October and November, we've already passed 5 budget amendments
Yeah.
to the budget we just approved in September.
But it kind of goes, speaks a little bit to the encumbering to a certain sense, because
Mm-hmm. A little bit,
when we
yeah.
talk about a budget that we set with certain idea of what it would cost, and then something comes in more, but we only do like a partial payment of that. And the prime example is the one I referred to a couple times now, which is the, the 290 wastewater line, or the sewer line,
Yep.
right? That initially it was thought it was going to be a project this big, so we budgeted this much. Now it's going to be a project this big. The first payment of that doesn't exceed our budget, so we didn't do a budget amendment. We need a way of tracking those things so that we
That's
know.
good. Yeah.
And that's something for discussion about from a process standpoint. How do we want to? Because you could almost say we could encumber in segments. Maybe one approach saying we encumber 25,000 for Freeland Turk out of the big budget, and the rest of it is for the bid owner, right, or the bid winner. That encumbrant amount, it's now 45,000. Maybe we need to do a budget amendment, at the time, or maybe we need to do something that's flagging it, right? That's just one of those kind of questions in my mind. Is sort of like this incrementalism that we get into
Yeah.
with whether it's a budget, a big thing like that, or small things like where it's like incrementalism. It's really hard to say, to adjust for.
I think that's the biggest problem we have, because once we start talking about IT and engineering, those are the two issues. It's that reoccurring types of stuff that we didn't budget for, it's much higher than we thought it was gonna be. And so how do we go back? And this was even a more difficult problem with that problem, because it added even more to what we'd already thought it was. So, yeah,
But it's just a point for us that we need to tackle that as well, I think, in
Yes.
terms of our context.
yeah.
Councilmember Merkel.
Yeah, perhaps all depends of the type of expenditures that you are doing. In the municipalities, we call a blanket order. So you make a blanket order. So if, for example, you will be using, for say, Home Depot, and we purchase things in Home Depot, we will say a blanket order of $20,000. So that is a blanket order and has a number with authorization. So each time that the employees, they purchase something, they use the PO number, and that go to the encumber, the 20,000 or 25. So little by little go down. But because you are logging, the employees, they log. And when they were logging, they say, well, now I have only 2,000. Okay, we need to do another blanket order. And it's another blanket order, and we encumber another $20,000. So this is now, if we know, for example, the landscaping, the contract is $115,000, we can encumber all the $115,000 since the beginning, because we know that that will be a contract.
Yep.
So that helped a lot, and this is mainly how we are working. When we are working with budgets, the point is you have to follow the flow chart that we are doing at this moment. And if each employee, they have to respect that. So that will be very difficult to pass. So for example, if they have some emergencies, and remember, in the budget, you can have emergencies, but we have accounts for emergencies. And in that level of emergency, always you have direct line, all depends on the emergency, or urgent. You have to have the grade. So in this case, you have to go to the city administrator, the head of department, city administrator, and the mayor. So all depends. But if he saw so much money, the mayor has to direct the order or use part of the council. And in that way, we don't need to wait too much, because you have a fund. And in that fund, now if you use $100,000 for contingency or for emergencies, that fund is there. And it can be open, but you don't know what kind of emergency will be, but the money is in that account. So the employees, they need to understand that they have the power, because they would try to comply and nobody will force them that they cannot do it. They need to do the job.
Yes, they have to
And we
get the
need to
job done.
allocate the resources
Yes.
as a backup of the activities that they will be doing. So, but you have to go by the levels.
Yeah.
If you go by the levels, the things that you're doing is important. So it's not difficult. You will see, but they need to be familiar. So after they will do that, blanket orders, POs, and again, new blanket orders. At the end of the year, more or less, I remember 6 weeks before we finished the budget, we started watching how they were all the budgets. And they were looking, no, we didn't use this money, we used that. So how we can help another in the same department
Yep.
or something. But we have to be watching. The key part of this is monthly
Monitor.
reports. Be
Monitoring.
watching that.
Yes.
Now, in that monthly reports, we need to have flexibility, because sometimes it can be a little more or a little less, and we need to go with that grade. Then we have to have flexibility. Nothing is 100%.
Yeah.
So with that kind of mind, it's important. But also, 100 is not 10,000. This is a
Right,
big
right.
mistake.
Yeah.
So okay, so this is my point.
So I heard from that, it's an emergency fund, contingency fund. I think that's a whole discussion for the budget and finance. The other thing is that monitoring. That is probably the one thing that, if I were to look at the overall thing, one is just the overall systems that we don't track, but it's also the monitoring process. And that is, we do ask that the budget and finance do that monthly monitoring. And it's just a simple looking at that report and making sure that we're in good shape and we're, and I heard them at a meeting maybe a month or so ago saying, it looks like we're getting, this area looks high, that type of thing. And so we need to start paying attention to what they're saying, and somehow that needs to come back to an amendment or some process. So we want to ensure that budget and finance that's a standard part of their agenda. So is what I would suggest. And then I think we need just a whole discussion on what is the proper contingency fund, and maybe, I don't think I don't have to be involved in that, but it's something that I think budget and finance should look at. I mean, we did not predict the freeze, and there are some things we are not going to predict. And so, but we should put aside money, but it can't be used for just anything, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm always concerned about is when you have such lack of flexibility, I worry about things not getting done. For example, these preventative maintenance things, it's like, oh, we don't have money in the budget, there's no line item for it, we'll just do it next year, and then we forget about it, and suddenly you've got a problem. And so I just, I'm not sure how good we are on preventative maintenance and how well we do it. But I know that there are some things that we haven't done, and it's like, we need some flexibility. I don't know how to do that. Maybe Carolyn, you have an idea, or Sylvia, you have an idea on that one.
So on the issue of flexibility, I don't mind if the city administrator's amount stays at $500, but the mayor needs additional, and I'll tell you why. There are some times, especially in munitions and things, where we can hedge. The price dropped. We know we're going to have some availability in the uniform line item or whatever it is. We need to be able to hedge and make those purchases. If that's something that the mayor can approve because the overall budget is going to stay the same and it's more than $2,500, he should be able to do that, because in the end, we're going to save the city some money. So in my mind, it's not necessarily that I need to be able to approve it, but at least he's got to be able to approve it, because really by state law, he's got up to 50,000. We're not going to violate the bidding process, none of that. We still have to go through the 3 bids. We still have to go through, competitive bids and sealed bids if we have to. But there are some times that things only happen in that instant. An auction from another city, for example, that has the ability for us to get a piece of equipment relatively quickly.
Okay. Well, how would we deal with that?
And that doesn't have to be authority given to me.
Yeah.
It can be authority provided to the mayor.
Yeah.
So, y'all,
I'm sorry. One very, very important point is we need to empower the employees. The empower is the head of departments. They need to feel that this is their money. And they request that money. So it's not bad at this moment to perhaps recalibrate. At this moment, send back we have one approved budget. But at this moment, the police in public works, they can be watching. And if they have some predictions or something that they believe, they need to let us know. So in that way, we will try to study how we can correct that. And this is only as a routine, or is urgent, or is emergency. And in that way, we will let them some flexibility and support, because the employees, they need to understand that we support them.
yeah, so, and it sounds like it's also opportunity too.
Yes.
If there's an auction coming up and we can buy something and save $10,000, we need to be, the mayor at
Open.
least, or somebody needs to be empowered to do that.
Flexibility is a very, like, what are you prescribing here? Like,
Yeah.
so, yes, flexible, but we just voted down an agenda item, right? That was
Right.
like flexibility. And I don't know. Do you have more behind the idea of
About
giving-
the flexibility?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What happened, I need to know the employees. I need to know the chief of police. So, for example, if he will tell me that at this moment, with the way that they are doing the job, they are looking some change, and they demand other kind of resources, I need to have flexibility and try to say how we can support that in order to do that. This is the type of flexibility that I am talking. It's the same with public works. At this moment, so we have some idea. We start with CIP. CIP is a big, big project. So you will see that soon that will be a huge, if we are not doing this, a huge problem. So what is the flexibility that I am looking is we need to have open eyes, and the employees, we are together. We are partners. They have a function and we have a function, but we need to work together. So when they say you have inflexibility, you are not flexible. No, we are flexible. But we need to work, we need to talk, and they need to feel in that way. This is the type of what do you try to ask me, Rob?
Well, I think Justin wants to say something. Let me, for
Okay.
a minute.
Yeah, a couple, so I'd love to clarify a little bit about whether, so these were like very opportunistic things, like how do we take advantage of opportunity? And it sounds like we have an appetite for saying that our staff can take advantage of opportunities by having some flexibility somewhere. I would be pretty reluctant to then say, and this actually ties right back into like the preventative maintenance question that you were asking, right? We have, and each department has a preventative maintenance line item in their budget. They should spend that on preventative maintenance, right? Like that's what we want to encourage.
Right.
What
We
we
want that happening.
absolutely need to discourage them from doing is being like, oh, there's a sale on bullets, I'm just gonna raid my preventative maintenance budget.
Right.
Right, so that's
Right.
not cool.
That's
But we
correct.
want to be able to say like, hey, maybe we're gonna up this budget item, or maybe this comes from an emergency line item, maybe we have to change their overall budget in a dynamic way. All about flexibility, but the budget document is like how do you go about your job? Like we're kind of directing, it's like a to-do list, almost, right?
Yeah.
And so one thing that I'd love, and this is just like stepping back a little bit, some of our, like in that budget amendment that came to us, only the things that were over budget were highlighted. But to me, when I'm looking at a department's operations and I see like some budget didn't get spent at all, so there's like definitely the case for like, you don't want to make people feel like they have to spend or else their budget gets cut. Like that's the bad version of this. But the good version of it is like, that guy didn't do any preventative maintenance this year. That's a huge problem.
Yes.
And so we need to make sure that our budget is being tracked in general, not just staying under. And so that's why when we talk about like, we were like under by 300,000 over here and over by 400,000, we just net it, because under budget things can be big problems too. And like we've seen that in like our staffing in some places where it's like, oh, we didn't hire anybody or whatever, there's like turnover. And we've addressed that like very proactively, and that's awesome. And like I feel like we've got a good rapport in general with staff. Like let's make sure that we have the right people to do it, but also understand why, and like look for both the over and under budget as signals.
I think that's right. And you said something that I think is real important. You said dynamic. Our budget's not very dynamic. And how do we make it where if something happens, that we have a little bit of that flexibility to make it dynamic for that opportunity
Well,
or
we
that
have that-
emergency or whatever?
We have that where they just need to tell the mayor, like we just need mayoral approval for like pretty significant amounts, and maybe we can change that. But that's not like it's gonna take 3 months, hopefully. I found Mark to be
Yeah, it
quite
should-
responsive.
Yeah, it should be pretty easy.
So I feel like we've got that pretty well covered. And maybe we can fine tune that one a little bit. But I think we have that level of dynamism. But then also, like, we need to be comfortable talking about the budget, right?
Yeah.
Like, we need to be able to come up here and be like, hey, and like in budget and finance, it's starting to come up. It's like, hey, we're at like 80%. We would like to be at 70%. So like, maybe we need to, either, are we gonna come in under budget, like, what's our expectations here? And like, should we proactively make a budget amendment? Like, let's do that. Like, let's very much be in the habit of raising budgets if we're kind of tracking, where we want to be, because we have to be comfortable doing it.
Yep.
And it can't take 5 months if it's going to be a
Right.
flexible system.
I agree. Are you?
Well, I think
do
that,
you feel
I mean,
that
it kind of gets back to this idea of we need to have some mechanism in place for tracking it effectively, because this incrementalism problem is an issue, right? When we're talking about, yes, the mayor can approve a budget up to $2,500, but when the next time the department comes and says, hey, I need to make another purchase, well, at that point, it's technically beyond the mayor's authority, but if it's like 2,000 here, 2,000 here, 2,000 here.
And perhaps a violation of purchasing policy.
Right, exactly. And so we need to have we don't have those controls in place right now for like a formalism of that, like saying, here's my formal request for this need, and by the way, you already approved up to a certain amount, so now we need to take it to council, right? That's where I think that there's some disconnect, right? If we go
Yeah.
down this route of like, ask the mayor, that is the appropriate route, but I think as a mayor, what I want to see is the context of those asks, right? To make sure that it's not exceeding my authority, to then have to go back to council and say, hey, we have a need here, and it's redirected to you guys for consideration and approval, right? So I think that should be part of the process as well. But I agree, it should be easy to ask the mayor for that, but I also want to make sure that it's not like a blanket without the context of what is that authority, and it's right now it's $2,500, and that's probably too little, right? To a certain extent. But it's also, I don't want it to become just every time it's below a threshold, so it doesn't get to the council level, right? And it becomes an issue of suddenly we're $10,000 over, $20,000 over, $50,000 over.
Yeah, if we move to IT, the next area, you will see that IT is a perfect example, and that's really and that's when we have call-ins where somebody has a problem, they can't log on, they can't do this, and particularly with all the virtual stuff that has happened. There was a lot of issues, and that budget was quite exceeded by about 22,000. And so, and that's one of those cumulative things that if we had regular reports to budget and finance, they would be monitoring it, better. But those are kind of really hard to budget for and really hard to track, I guess. And I don't know how delayed the invoicing is and all of that either. And so
It's already happened by the time we get the invoice.
by the time you get it, it's
already
done.
happened. And the appropriate control is going to be similar to the engineering. This is the task order for management services. This is what you charge to, and we've got to have that report with Univista the same way we're doing with the engineers. But to budget flexibility, I wanted to touch on, There are some cities who restrict certain areas of the budget. For example, we used to have something called salary savings. And that was a way to encourage process improvement and efficiencies within the budget. And so departments were encouraged to have a 10 to 15% salary savings at the end of the year. That meant hold a vacancy, that meant cross-train, use temp, whatever it is, as long as it wasn't detrimental to the organization. So the first tranche was salaries and benefits. They couldn't touch that one. The next area was operations. They could touch printing costs, fuel, those kinds of things. They couldn't touch capital, which included preventive maintenance. So the budget was split into 4 sections, and they could only touch the middle section. And that may be where we start. That may be where you do have some ability to work directly with the department heads within that section. And the rest of them are too important for us to touch. They're too important for us to have any sort of leeway, because you do want to see who's doing preventive maintenance. You do want to see the capital program advancing. You do want to see staff and salaries, working their way through. So maybe those areas of the budget are just not touchable.
And that might be one of the, like a segmenting budget, right, items might be one solution we can explore as far as like a way of giving some flexibility if there's an ability, if we want to take that approach. I just want to write that down as just a thought, because I also want to point out that we are very close to the time that we need to wrap up. Obviously, we're going to need to have a continued discussion, and an additional time for this, because I think what we're doing right now is very good in terms of looking at some of the tracking the root causes, looking at our policies in terms of like where they're, very high level, but we haven't gotten into the details, right? And some of these solutioning ideas are things that we obviously want to explore further, but we're not going to solve it tonight, right? So that being said, I do want to get a sense of where council wants to proceed with this, so that we can continue our conversation with the acknowledgement that, I should say, I'm open to having continued discussions and continued workshops. I like this format. I like this kind of, this ability to do so. We have a lot of meetings in the next week, so I don't want to like compound, this, but we also, this is something we don't specifically have on our retreat, right? So it's not going to, like, we're not going to carve out time in our retreat to do this, even though we may talk around it and things like that. So my suggestion, just as the mayor, would be, this is part 1. Let's schedule a follow-on to this sometime, either maybe the end of next week or the week after, right, where we have like a little time between councils can do our work session. But I kind of want to get guidance from council on where you guys want to go as a next step as well, since I don't want to cut this off, but I also want to make sure that we're following up.
Yeah. May I have?
Our council member, Mayor Pro Tem Carmona.
Yeah. I would like to, was excellent the job, this job that they were doing, the members of the council. This is very, very, very good. But I would like to go also, I would like to add, when they were doing the budget adjustment, from where they were taking the money. At this moment, the member Justin, he mentioned, and some of the money, they say surplus required for general fund revenues. Other was repairs and replacement funding, transfer from repair and replacement. Utility contractual service. So that money is not the best place to take that for budget adjustments. So that criteria is something that we need to study. Because, for example, in the police department, they have in the sweep almost $78,000. But they have transfers from the repair and replacement funding that does not belong to the police. It's from Fund 21, Department 12, and it's not the police.
It's crime control.
Yeah, but you have repair and replacement fundings, then you put money before, okay. So public works is in the same way. Mm-hmm. And utility contractual, when they are doing that, they purchase the water. And later they sell the water. If you take money for budget adjustments, this not represent in reality the cost of the water and the cost of the wastewater.
That's true.
So that kind of things, I want that we will be working together. This is the most important. So if we are working together, not to say this is wrong, is how we can correct it.
Yeah, let's
Please.
put
Yes.
that up there, because I think that's a great thing to look at, because one of our policies says that we have to, we have to take, if we take money from another line item, it has to be very similar or something
Yes.
like that. That's one of our policies.
Yes.
So I think maybe we could put it kind of like that, policy of where we, budget adjustment line item, the line item pulled from, I guess. Help me, Justin.
Policy, is it like how to measure the policy problems or cause?
Right now, we don't have a solution right now. I guess so it's not a cause, it's a concern is what it is.
Yeah, we need to evaluate.
Funding, okay, funding,
Yeah, we need
Funding.
to evaluate the funding for the budget adjustments.
just maybe as a root cause. I would put it root cause. Because that's still a problem. Yeah.
Proper funding for budget adjustments.
Yeah, I don't use those terminology, countermeasures. They're good. They're not my old school. That's a very good point.
So council, just as a, did you have your hand raised, Rob? Or,
I did earlier. I don't know if we want to capture, we did talk about like increasing the
thresholds or
the
spending?
thresholds.
Yeah.
In my understanding, that would only exacerbate the problems that we have. So maybe we just go with what Sylvia suggested and just.
Yeah, not yet. Let's get to where we want to be first. How you want to see the budget, how you want to see the reports, and then after we're in that process, if there's still an issue, then let's talk about any
Okay.
elasticity.
So we're acknowledging that. Don't write it down. Yeah.
So council, how would you like to proceed? Do we want to try to meet a week from now-ish? I guess it's a little bit too soon, but like towards the end of next week or the week of spring break? I think week of spring break may be hard for people, actually.
I'm away, and I think we explicitly moved it because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll be able to explore the workshop idea before council meetings. So maybe we can take it through
Steps at a
through
time,
bites.
that's possible too. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about at the retreat is maybe some format changes that would allow us to have this type of meeting prior to each council meeting, which is, I think, it's something that Sylvia's worked with in other cities. And so we might have a workshop from like 5 to 6, for example, and we might tackle certain things like this on kind of a routine basis. So it gives a little bit less formality to the process, a little bit. And we can also, use that to our advantage when we're talking about, specific agenda items. But that being said, we may need like a longer time period, but we'll also have an opportunity during the retreat, and maybe at the retreat, we can revisit when we want to talk through this process.
Yeah. Yeah, because we haven't even touched engineering. And
Exactly.
That's a bear.
That's the big one, yeah. Councilmember
So, yeah.
Johnson? Or were you gonna?
I was going to move to adjourn. I know that's aggressive.
I was gonna, just because we have had a public member of the public that's attended here. I did want to, and we do have an agenda item called out. I know that Melissa, you also wrote an OpenGov. Just give you an opportunity. Do you want to add a public comment at this time, since before we close the meeting?
There it is.
Okay, I want to appreciate all the work that everybody's done. I think y'all are doing a great job. The only thing I want to contextualize is that in spite of all the budget amendments, and those are large chunks of change that we switched, we still did $539,000. When people are talking about not having flexibility in the budget, that's a big bunch of flexibility. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I think that y'all are doing a great job. I really like the discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you. All right, with that, Councilmember Johnson,
I move we adjourn for the day.
is there a second to that? Mayor Pro Tem? Okay. All right. And it's thirded also, I guess, twice. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Sure, aye.
All opposed, say nay. All right, we are adjourned at 5:31 p.m. Thank you, staff, for